Brace yourself.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to show that multiplayer games are some of the biggest and most popular games in the industry right now. Simply browsing through Twitch on a regular basis doesn't just show a massive player base, but also a large collective of spectators who are interested in how players fare with or against their peers and rivals. It's pretty tough to get away from multiplayer games, and that prevalence has definitely had an effect on the industry and its perception of single-player experiences. It's even caused single-player games to adopt some elements from multiplayer games, and that's something I think we should explore further. In 2020, it's not so easy to get a single-player game that evades the influence of its multiplayer counterparts, at least not with bigger titles. Single-player games are changing, and it's becoming all the more difficult to recapture that sense of solitude that made these experiences so defined. Now, before we get started, I want to say that I don't dislike multiplayer games. Some of my favorite games of all time are multiplayer by design, and I think the gaming sphere would be worse without these games as a part of it. I have trouble turning down a game of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate or Rocket League with friends, rivals, or even strangers. Also, there are some games and genres that fundamentally benefit from multiplayer. Fighting games cultivate competition, MMOs cultivate camaraderie. These games would be much different experiences without multiplayer, and in these cases, I really can't argue that having other players around you is a bad thing, something that makes the game a lesser endeavor. But a solely single-player experience is much harder to find in more popular games, and I'm not just talking about tacked-on team deathmatch modes in your action-adventure game of choice. Leaderboards, ghost data, trophy and achievement comparisons, pretty much anything that has the player directly comparing or changing how they play to others, that still has elements of an interconnected and multi-user climate seeping in. For example, Persona 5 was one of my favorite games of 2017, but even I succumbed to using their network fusion element, a slightly novel online fusion component that rarely felt necessary, only serving as some kind of shameless shoehorning of online functionality that didn't need to be there. Another example is how Telltale's The Walking Dead or The Wolf Among Us showed statistics of players' actions, letting you know how other players responded when faced with tough decisions that reshaped certain moments in the story. Telltale's style of adventure game, illusion of choice aside, wanted the players' actions to have weight, resulting in a more personal occurrence of decision-making. Based on the choices I made in a Telltale game, I felt like it was my story, crafted from my own decisions. I mean, yeah, my line of choices was by no means isolated to just me. I'm sure thousands of other players made the same sequence of choices I did. But Telltale's formula was about letting those decisions connect with the player via the game's drama and presentation. Seeing how other players went about the story made my personal journey feel less personal, reminding me of how artificial and outright scripted my playthrough actually was. As illusionary as my decisions were, Telltale at least kept the veil down throughout the game, but reminding me that my decisions were shared across the community so commonly dispelled that illusion and made a less personal experience for me. But this isn't limited to the games themselves. The gaming culture is more interconnected than ever before, and the influence of this connectivity can turn a single-player game into a multi-person experience. Streaming services like Twitch have turned gaming into a much more social event. A single-player game can be live-streamed and viewed by hundreds, even thousands of people at once. When all eyes are on a streamer, connecting with a single-player experience on a more personal level can be different than simply playing alone without live streaming. I should know. My first playthrough of Persona 4 was live-streamed on Twitch in its entirety, and I believe my experience with the game would have been drastically different had I simply played the game alone. My time talking with chat and speaking to people who are now good friends reshaped my single-player experience into something communicative and social, something I think game streaming in general has successfully made very common. However, we often take for granted the value of a tight, personal, single-player experience, one that feels customized to our own time and place. As impressive as a packed open world is, one filled to the brim with other real-world players, it can feel a little claustrophobic and even artificial in its design. It's almost like there's a competition at work, that the game is fighting to grab your attention, pushing through the crowd to show you something cool just for you. Imagine if The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, instead of having a giant open kingdom to explore, had hundreds or even thousands of other characters scouring its world simultaneously, each one represented by an actual player. Would you be experiencing the game the same way? I don't think you would. It might be more interesting for some of you, even better than Breath of the Wild is now, but it would not be the same. Breath of the Wild was a total success in giving the player a solitary experience, letting them solve puzzles their own ways, approach combat situations to fit their playstyle, and overall, create a personal experience that was pretty difficult for other players to duplicate, on their first run anyway. That's one reason why I find Breath of the Wild to be such a landmark title. It recaptured the solitude of adventure, letting you explore the world and develop your skill without the detours of a multiplayer component. It wasn't fighting for attention amongst thousands of other players at the same time. It was dedicated entirely to the player's journey and how they felt while exploring the vast world of Hyrule. Even as I discuss Breath of the Wild with friends and other content creators, the journey itself, the game experience itself, was my own. But I know what you're saying. Just disconnect your system from the internet and play the game that way. Well, that is a valid option. Hell, I've even done that several times before, but it doesn't hide the fact that the industry itself has become infatuated with multiplayer components, for better or worse. We've seen it time and again. Games that originally stem from more isolated, solitary experiences are being changed into something that needs multiplayer to function, or so we're told anyway. Many of the pillars of strong single-player titles have been perverted with intrusive monetization, cluttered with artificial elements in favor of taking advantage of communities and fan bases. And as sections of the industry condemn single-player games as insubstantial products, some developers have stayed the course and continue to produce quality titles that feel personal and tuned to the player's own input and actions. I think there are bright spots in the indie sphere too. Even considering the issues I have with first-person narratives or walking simulators on a design level, I do value their recurring focus on solitary experiences. Games like The Vanishing of Ethan Carter do a great job of presenting a world rich with direct player immersion, removing much of the hustle and bustle of a multiplayer experience and letting the player revel in the atmosphere of playing alone. These games lack extraneous input from other players, and it makes the journey feel contained, like watching an emotional film or reading a dramatic novel alone. Honestly, this whole video sounds like I'm just yearning for the good old days, a scrubby introvert who can't find the appeal of multiplayer games in 2020. And look, I understand, but as someone who found a ton of value in games like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Final Fantasy XIV, even going so far as saying they're some of his favorite multiplayer games ever, I still say that stepping aside from the crowd circulating around each of those games brings about a desire to just immerse oneself in a game world, without any other players but yourself. Sometimes you just want to sit down and play a game alone, experiencing the adventure in a way that feels solitary, one that you can directly call a personal journey. Unfortunately, nowadays, the larger bodies of the industry require effort from players to get that personalized journey. That's what makes me so skeptical when a huge third-party publisher announces a single-player game, promising that it will provide something dramatic or emotional. Those lines aren't always genuine. You really shouldn't have to disconnect and unplug from everything in your lifestyle to get a video game experience that feels tailor-made, one that you can truly call your own without any outside input to shape it. I like playing games with friends, but everybody needs at least some time to themselves when playing a game. I wish the industry was willing to meet us halfway on that.